And we are going to introduce our keynote speaker, and he's a fellow that it takes two people to introduce him to start with. And,
I'm moral support.
Both of us, Andy and I, hold him in very high regard. I met Bruce at one of these conferences a few years ago, and sometimes you sit down beside somebody and you say hello and you talk for a few minutes, and you know pretty quick it's a person you'd like to continue to know. And that was my experience, and I think that was Andy's experience when he was a student. And he's going to talk about something that I've been interested in since the beginning. When we first founded the Aucilla Research Institute, we had discussions about what our mission would be, and the mission we talked about was that we would have a research center that would add to the body of human knowledge, and the second thing we would do is to propagate science and knowledge to the general public so that they would make better decisions about how we were going to live on the planet as we go forward. I was just looking at a napkin that we wrote on that over at Tupelo's 12 or 15 years ago. And Bruce has been with us for a friend and a supporter for quite a long time. And so Andy and I have the real pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Bruce MacFadden.
Thanks, Jack. Andy, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for being here this evening. So about 6 months ago, when Jim and Jack asked me to give the keynote speech to the meeting, I said, "Are you really sure you want me to do this? I'm not sure what I'll talk about." Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Vaughn. So my original title that I submitted, I said, Jim said, talk about that stuff that you do. Like the stuff that you do with the museum and the schools. You don't need to talk about your science. You've already talked about that the last two meetings. But talk about that stuff that you do. Okay, so I sent a title up, and Jim sent me an email back saying, can't you submit a more interesting title? He said it was sort of boring. So I got with my students, and we came up with a title called Florida Prehistory for Everyone. And interestingly, that's sort of good. I like that. But yesterday, my wife and I were in Thomasville at the bookstore, and I love David McCullough. I'm sad that he's gone. He passed away about 3 years ago. And I love the way he writes history and how accessible it is, but also how factually correct and thoroughly researched it is. And his new book, which is just out, which I had to buy, and if I probably would have changed the title of my talk to Archaeology Matters or Paleoarchaeology Matters instead of Florida Prehistory for Everyone. Anyway, I want to talk about why archaeology matters, or I'm a paleontologist, so I'm going to say why archaeology and paleontology matter or should matter to society, and how as scientists we have a responsibility to communicate our passion for what we do and also the research evidence that we have to support the kind of knowledge that we build. So I studied Florida history or prehistory a long time ago, and McPhee, the author McPhee, is that right? Coined the term John McPhee, coined the term deep time for a time way before human history, and the time of the dinosaurs and the mammoths and the mastodons and the fossil horses that I've studied, and kinds of animals that roam the earth, animals and plants that roamed and lived on the earth millions of years ago. So I'm a prehistorian of deep time because I study fossils and paleontology. But I also study fossils that lived until about 10,000 years ago and interacted with a new species that invaded North America a while back. So I study the native megafauna, and with people like Andy, I learn about the first Floridians and the interesting intersection between My study of ancient megafauna meaning large, giant animals like mammoths, mastodons, gigantic ground sloths, etc., large dire wolves, and how the two interacted. And we know that there's a very short interval of time based on the geologic time scale when these two when the megafauna, the native megafauna, and the first Floridians coexisted. And it's about 5,000 years. About 5,000 years in existence, with geologically speaking, is a geologic instant. If you look at the geologic time scale here, I don't want to put anybody's eye out. Okay, so we're talking about the overlap between Ice Age megafauna and humans, and we can focus on Florida, and this is probably for about 5,000 years, give or take, okay? We can argue exactly whether it's 14 to 9,000 or 15 to 10,000. It depends upon which species of megafauna you're talking about, but that's a very interesting interval of time where first Floridians, Native American indigenous peoples, interacted with the now extinct megafauna. And more than 36 species of megafauna have become extinct since the last glacial maximum 20 to 25,000 years ago until about 10,000 years ago. So it's a really interesting time for overlap. And we actually have evidence, or I should say, thanks to people here at the ARI, we have evidence who have looked at a really famous fossil bison skull, which has a projectile point embedded in the top of its skull. And this was found by Roger Alexan, right, in 1960s? 81 or 82. Okay, but it's been re-examined, excuse me, and by a group of people from ARI, you can see here, they've determined that this skull existed about 14,000 years ago, which is probably early on in terms of human occupation or the invasion of what's now Florida by Native Americans. So the Aucilla Research Institute, the ARI, has contributed to an understanding of this coexistence of ancient megafauna and first Floridians in a way that's scientific. Okay? So I want to talk, you already know this, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. That what's interesting about Florida's ancient megafauna and first humans? Well, I should tell you that there are over 1,000 fossil localities in our collections at the museum of Pleistocene megafauna, and there are hundreds of archaeological sites as well. And this provides a very rich record of fossils and archaeological evidence during the latest Pleistocene, or what somebody said today in one of their talks, the terminal Pleistocene. It allows us to understand how ancient mammals and native Floridians were part of natural ecosystems, how they interacted, what we can learn from them, and how this knowledge informs our future. And I believe that it's important to understand about these things because it instills in us a sense of pride in Florida's contribution to North American, what I call paleoarchaeology, meaning the combination of paleontology and archaeology. We're very fortunate to be able to be, so I retired after being a professor for 47 years at the University of Florida a year and a half ago, and I was blessed with having a job that in the morning I got up, I couldn't wait to get to work because I loved what I did so much. Okay, so I was a basic scientist. I was not curing cancer or doing anything that has direct immediate societal benefit. So I became aware of the importance of the social value of basic science. Basic science is the kind of science that, like paleontology and archaeology, that likely does not have direct application like what we call bench science, curing cancer, human health, etc. Therefore, the way we fund our research is oftentimes through philanthropy or through getting money from federal agencies like the National Science Foundation, where much of my money came from when I was a practicing paleontologist at the University of Florida. So it's taxpayer dollars that have funded, I've been fortunate enough to receive taxpayers' dollars to fund my research. So I feel as a scientist that it's a responsibility to give back to society, to thank them for the taxes they've paid, and I need to communicate the value of what I do and their investment in what we do as scientists. So the rest of my talk is going to be about how do we do this. This is not a talk about my scientific discoveries. It's a talk about how do we reach out for the benefit of society, and how all institutions like ARI or the Florida Museum of Natural History or other places that seek to understand the natural world through archaeology or paleontology or natural history also do this. There's a term which was in my original title that Jim nixed, called broader impacts, which really isn't, you don't really need to know. Broader impacts basically is the idea at the National Science Foundation that if you're getting funded to do basic research, you need to explain back to the taxpayers and Congress about the impact, the broad impacts of what you do that benefits society. Okay, now when I say prehistory for everyone, I don't really mean everyone, and I'll tell you why. Because I'd rather be interested in focusing our attention on who cares about science. 100% of our society does not care about science. We might think they should, but they don't. And no matter how much you're going to try to convince them, you're probably going to be wasting. It's going to be much more of an effort than it likely would be a return on investment. But the cool thing is that in this Pew Research Center poll of Americans of saying what percentage of U.S. adults who say they are interested in each of these news topics, about 70% of the people polled felt that they were curious or interested in science. Some are very interested, like us here today, and others are naturally curious, and if we do a good job of broadening the impact in society, we can draw them in and let them know how we're fortunate enough to benefit from their investments in our pure research. So we're never going to convince everybody, but that's just the way it is. So as far as I'm concerned, as a scientist, I want to focus mostly on people who are interested in science, or maybe people in school, K-12, who don't know that they're interested in science. But they might get interested in science because something about what we do turns them on, and that excites me. Okay, so how do we communicate? What are the various modalities or ways in which we can communicate science to the general public? And there are lots of them. And I've not given you all the ones we could do, but the ones that I want to talk about, both what we do at the Florida Museum and ARI, are museums and lifelong learning, or mobile museums, formal classroom outreach, which I know you know a lot about here, and we're going to hear about tomorrow, I hope, in one of the talks. The internet has changed the face of communicating science. I'd like to say for the better, but I'm not always sure. As is social media in communicating what we do in a way that makes sense if it's properly curated and trustworthy. And I'd like to say that conferences like this, what I call accessible conferences, meaning that this is not just for the professionals, it's anybody who's interested, who wants to come here. This is a great way to communicate science in a way that it's not just about the science, but it's about the community of scholars and community of communities that are interested in what institutions like the ARI and the museum do. Museums have huge potential impact. Museums, the kind of science that mostly is done at museums, or the kind of outreach, is called lifelong learning. And there was an article published about 15 years ago by some educators of science, Falk and Dirkling, who said that about 95% of all learning occurs outside of the classroom. If you think about the amount of time that a person goes to school, this is a box of your entire opportunity to learn through your lifetime for, this is 70 years, okay? Only a small percentage of your entire lifetime is occupied by the sort of force feeding of learning in K-12, okay, that you're required to do in formal education. Most of your opportunity to learn can occur outside of the classroom. In fact, this is an easy pie chart which just distills down this, that there's a small slice of 5% of this pie that is done through K-12 learning during the hours that you're in a classroom for 9 months, 8 or 9 months of the year, from the time you're 5 to the time you're 18. Okay? But the entire rest of your life can be used to learn about science and other things. And one of the best places to learn about science is at natural history museums. I did a survey about 10 years ago in an article that I published on the impact of natural history museums, and I tallied up that the previous year, about 50 million people visited U.S. natural history museums. That's a huge potential impact. And you have a Museum of Florida History in Tallahassee. That's a local museum that's, 25 or 30 miles away. We also have a museum that I worked at for 47 years in Gainesville, and I studied the kinds of Ice Age fossils that we're talking about today at the Florida Museum of Natural History, and I've given a talk previously at these conference on fossil horses, but then on extinct megafauna of Florida at the end of the last Pleistocene. And this is a skeleton of the replica that you have outside of Priscilla. The original is on display at our museum, and I was talking to Jack and others a few minutes ago about how we acquired that, and that was a whole nother story which I can't get into, otherwise my talk will go longer than I think we all want. The other thing that people love to understand is the process of science. Not just seeing the skeletons, the end results of dinosaurs on display, which is cool. We like that. Or the mammoths or the mastodons and say, oh my gosh, imagine what that mammoth from the Aucilla River, which is on display at our museum, imagine what that animal was like when it lived, 16, 18, however, during about 16 or 18,000 years ago. That's cool, and these dinosaur skeletons on display and that we had in storage in our museum, we put out into an exhibit called Science Up Close, but the purpose of this exhibit was to show the public how we were, and these were volunteers and students and staff from our museum who were actually actively involved in curating fossils from a dig site that have been working over the past 10 years, and we developed our own exhibit called Science Up Close, Fantastic Fossils. It had traditional displays. Everybody wants to go see dinosaurs if they can, so we wheeled out the dinosaurs. But we also found that the public was more interested in actually talking to real scientists about what they do and how they do it. And this was an exceedingly popular exhibit, temporary exhibit that lasted at our museum for about a year. And during that time, we had more than 100,000 visitors that came into our temporary exhibit to see what we did. And it was very successful. Now, not every kid in Florida has access to go to a museum in Gainesville or in Miami or even Tallahassee, let's say. So instead of expecting that your visitors come to you, we should take what we have out to them. And this has been the concept of mobile museums. And I'm going to say in just a minute that what you're doing with Priscilla is exactly what you should be doing. You're bringing the fossils to the site, and the student, whether it's a fair and festival with lifelong learners, or whether you're taking it to schools, you're doing a service by bringing the materials to them instead of them having to come and visit you. Okay, this actually was we used to be called the Florida State Museum in Gainesville, which when I was there for the first 15 years of being a faculty member, everybody would say, well, you're up in Tallahassee, right? Because that's where the Florida State University is. I said, no, we're at the University of Florida, but we're at the Florida State Museum. And that was just very difficult to explain. So we finally changed our name to the Florida Museum of Natural History in 1988, and that solved some of the problems. But Grobman, back in the 1950s, it was a very forward-thinking director, and he felt that we needed to have a mobile museum that would provide statewide access, particularly in rural counties of Florida that were not in close proximity to natural history museums where the kids could go on a field trip to the city to see the museums. And this was very successful. He got crosswise with the president of our university about this, and I won't go into it completely, but it was successful for the period of time that he was involved in this mobile museum project. Since that time, many other museums have done this. In New York, there was a Dino Winnebago about 10 years ago, and my PhD student, Larissa DeSantis, who now is a professor at Vanderbilt, she took a year off between her master's and coming to work with me on a PhD, and she drove, Larissa's about 5'2", okay, and she would drive this dinosaur Winnebago through the streets of New York to the hundreds of schools in New York City and have a mobile museum, and that was what she did with her assistant for a year, and that was also wildly successful, bringing the museum to where it needs to go. Okay, so in 2018, I started a new institute, and the president of the university, and I was really interested in, I'd been working with teachers for about a decade, taking teachers with me to Panama to collect fossils and have them come out to Levy County to collect fossils, and really feeling very, very, I felt that I was giving back to society through working with teachers. And in 2018, I just started a new institute, and the president of the university had this call for what were called moonshots. Moonshots were projects that could potentially greatly impact some aspect of the society in Florida. We're the University of Florida, we're the land-grant state of the university, and the president said it has to impact for the better something about Florida. So I proposed, and I'd only been director of this new institute for 2 months, and I competed for money. I said, I'm going to propose an idea. Now, moonshot means it's like Kennedy's idea in 1963, that he proposed a moonshot that by the end of that decade, scientists would enable the science and technology to put a man on the moon. Now, Kennedy was not with us in 1969 when it happened for the reasons that we all know, but he was visionary in his moonshot. So now people who like to envision, strategic planning and stuff, they say, we're going to enact a moonshot. So President Fox in 2018 said, we're going to develop a pot of money and offer a request for proposals from our faculty to do something novel that will change the face of some aspect of making Florida a better place. So we proposed a Scientist in Every Florida School program, and it was funded. I mean, we were just this little baby institution that hadn't even gotten hired. There was just me and my assistant, and we got this funded, and then we started this whole new program, and it's still going strong, and our fundraiser says this is a great thing for philanthropy, and she's used it as a magnet for us creating a small endowment for this when I'm gone and other people are gone. So this has been really great, and just the energy of when you go into the classroom and you see the students and the teachers, okay, or here's a student who's measuring 3D printed megalodon shark's teeth and figuring out how big that animal was through a regression analysis. Really cool. This girl was in sixth grade. Or our wildlife biologist, Alex, who loved going out into the schools, and he loved frogs. And look at the wonder on these kids' faces when this is one of his favorite frogs there. Okay, so it's just to see the joy and the wonder and the excitement on the kids' faces when you're interacting with them and getting them excited about science. It doesn't get any better than that as far as I'm concerned. Equally as interesting to me is I love working with teachers. They're the salt of the earth. And the reason I'm a scientist is because my 10th grade science teacher, Dr. Greenstein, in Portchester, New York in 1966, when I was taking earth science, said, Bruce, I think you're interested in this stuff, and you could be a earth scientist if you want to. Nobody had ever told me that before. I didn't have a clue that you could do that. And if he hadn't said that, I probably wouldn't be standing here today. So I love working with teachers, and the cool thing about teachers is you're multiplying the benefit through you're training the trainers who are the teachers, and they go out, and every teacher has in middle school 150 students or 125 students every year, and you're multiplying the benefit of the learning that you've transmitted or collaborated with in the train-the-trainer model of teachers. So we've had workshops, and we've had several different National Science Foundation projects that have actually leveraged the Scientists in Every Florida School program to do outreach and education in schools. And I currently have one that I'm using fossil shark's teeth to teach middle school science kids about artificial intelligence. And that's a whole nother story, which has been a very successful model. The other thing that's been successful is if I go into school, so I'm an old codger, okay? If I go into school and talk about my role or my journey as a scientist, it's a whole lot less impactful than if I send my students in to the classroom, like Michael Ziegler, who was a master's student of mine, and he's much closer to the age of the kids that he's talking to. And they talk, these are what are called role model classroom visits. They don't necessarily come in to only talk about their science, they talk about their journey and how they acquired a science identity. And that's a whole other way of being able to engage the kids in not just the learning, but understanding that you too can be a scientist if you want to, as Dr. Greenstein did for me in 1966. Citizen science is really important. I'm going to talk in a few minutes, or at least show you some slides from what you guys do at ARI. We do it at the University of Florida. We've had a fossil site called the Montbrook Fossil Site in Levy County, okay? And I've had teachers out there. Rebecca was a middle school teacher from Santa Cruz, California. I took a sabbatical in Santa Cruz and worked in the school district there, teaching science in elementary school, and I loved it. And Rosalind here is not an elementary school student. She's an award-winning teacher in Escambia County, and she went out to the Montbrook Fossil Site and found a tiny fossil horse, a dwarf horse from that locality that's 5 million years old. So people can learn by doing and helping, and if we add up the number of hours that the 1,000 citizen scientists have done and helped and participated in these digs, it's tens of thousands of hours that have contributed. So, social media. We have a YouTube. We have a large website. I'll talk about those statistics in just a minute. But we have a very popular social media channel that's well curated by our IT, our computer people, our computer staff. And this social media channel has different videos, okay, about frogs, about caterpillars, birds. Is that underwater paleontology? Exploring North Florida rivers for Ice Age fossils, Ice Age tusks. Look at that. Collecting fossils, fossil adventures. So there's some paleontology, but this is the gamut, the range of what we do in our museum. Now, if you add up the number of times that each of these videos has been viewed, it's astronomical. Now, I can't possibly imagine this, but it says it's true. 209, you can't read the writing right here, but I'm going to tell you right down here. It says that 291,000, that this video on why this frog can't hop has been viewed 291,000 times. Okay? If you add up the number of times that each one of these has been viewed, you can't see the numbers, but they're down here, but it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that these 12 videos have been viewed almost 1 million times by the public. Another way of engaging people, you may not see them face to face or in the classroom, but they'll come to you in a different way through various various types of social media. Okay, internet websites, of course, you all have. ARI has a nice website. Our website has 20,000 pages of information and online catalogs. And in 2020, we had 8.6 million page views in 1 year. So if we get 250,000 visitors physical visitors to our museum, we're getting over 8 million visitors to our website a year from all over the world. Many of them could never come to our museum, but they can reach us through the internet. Now I want to segue to what you guys are doing here, and I believe that what you're doing aligns with your mission of promoting scientific, or your tagline, or whatever you want to call it, promoting scientific research and education. And then if you read into the literature, read into the website, you have a very clear focus or mandate or priority. It's not that you're not going to do other things, which you do, but it's very clear that you promote scientific research and education on the prehistory and history of the Big Bend area of Florida and elsewhere. And it's important that you do that so that you know what your mission is, and other people who view you on the website also understands your mission. Now, in whether it's the Florida Museum or the ARI, the core of anything that a scientific institution has to do is its research, and has a team of research scholars who are working to advance knowledge about your mission and what you seek, and the knowledge that you seek to build. Now, it's not enough just to conduct the research, but you also have to publish on the discoveries that are made, and these are some select examples of discoveries that were made by other people who collaborated with you, like this article here about the paleotempest. It's about looking at tropical cycles in the Ecofina Channel, Florida. And in the acknowledgments, ARI and people in this audience are thanked and acknowledged for their support of this research. So you guys are not just doing your own research, you're supporting and encouraging research of other collaborators, which is really important. But in addition, and this is published in the Journal of Archaeological Science, which is a highly respected, peer-reviewed professional publication. You also publish, meaning people in this audience, are publishing in journals like Nature, Scientific Report. Nature is one of the most highly cited and highly respected journals in the world. And you guys published in 2023 a really interesting article about the Younger Dryas in Wakulla Springs. And then there's more synthetic books about first Floridians, and a book by our dear friend Barbara Purdy, who synthesizes the kind of work that has been supported by your institute, the University of Florida, Florida State, etc. This is a very important part of you have to publish and disseminate your knowledge to other people so they understand what you do. Okay, so you do K-12 outreach and education here, and I took these photos from the website, or maybe I got them from Jana, I can't remember, or social media. This is an important thing, and I talked to Will the other night, the things you're doing at your school here, and the excitement of how you're generating interest, and what you're doing with along with the students here is absolutely it's very inspiring, and I applaud you for what you're doing at the Institute in collaboration with the local schools. That's really important. Okay, mobile museums. Priscilla is a great way to spread the word of what you do. You can bring Priscilla to K-12 to schools, but bringing these kinds of artifacts to festivals that are typically not themed only for archaeology and paleontology could potentially draw some of that 70% who may not know they're interested in archaeology, or their kids, but you could get them interested in archaeology. You also use citizen science and volunteers, and that's really important to get the people engaged, and they help you by making collections. I'm not a social media person. My students told me that my Facebook had been hacked about 5 years ago, and that the messages that were being sent by the hacker were not ones that I would want to repeat in this audience. But anyway, so I don't do social media. I can barely answer my email and do the other things. But I know for those of you who love social media, it's really important, particularly if you want to engage a younger demographic into what you're doing. Instagram is really good. Instagram is really good. X, which used to be Twitter, is really good for science communication. Facebook is less so. It's my grandchildren tell me that it's for people like you, Poppy. It's less of interest to the younger set, and they've transitioned to places like Instagram and things like TikTok that we're not supposed to talk about, and other things. Okay, moving right along and just about to finish up here, hosting accessible conferences. So I've been to 3 of these, the last 3. I've loved every one of them. I've given a talk at each one. I've learned a lot. I've socialized. I've made new friends. And that's what it's all about. I've really enjoyed it. So what you're doing with these conferences are very important. And there's a depth of, okay, we might have 8 million hits on our website, but what did those people learn? You know, studies have shown that people tend to spend 1 minute, when they go to a website, if they spend more than 1 minute, they're learning. If they spend less than 1 minute, they're just sort of surfing. You know, and probably 80% of the 8 million people that go on our website are surfing to go find something else. So they're not really learning. But the cool thing about this, and some other things that you do, the depth of learning and the depth of interaction that you're having, and how you're changing people's lives through the acquisition of knowledge and encouragement, there's no substitution for that. Okay, so in summary, any institution, no 2 institutions are the same, and every institution should sort of mix and match those particular strategies or combinations of strategies that make sense for you. You could use the internet and social media and might attract hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. If you have a museum, they're very expensive to maintain, of course, and they're not necessarily feasible in all situations. But you could do virtual museums, and you could attract people. K-12 outreach to me is really important. Even though it's 5% of what people's opportunity to learn, it's a very powerful 5%. Mobile displays like Priscilla, citizen science engagement, and then conferences and public talks like we're doing at this meeting are all really important. So that's sort of like a menu of things you could try to mix and match in terms of an overall strategy about how we might want to, meaning any institution, develop your broader impacts plan. I think it's particularly important to develop the next generation of Florida prehistory scientists. And we're doing that at the museum, and you're doing that here by supporting basic research, getting the next generation involved, providing scholarships and internships, and then making making the next generation aware of their science identity and potential careers that they could move into. So in my last 2 slides, I want to just have a take-home message. The first take-home message is that research is the core of what we do in scholarly institutions. But research discoveries are of limited utility if they only reach our colleagues, if we're just talking to ourselves. But they can be more widely communicated by broader impact activities, a thing that NSF talked about. So we need to communicate research to benefit society, and this can include a range of activities. We don't need to do all of them, but our boards and our leaders at the museums need to figure out what makes sense to who we're trying to reach, what the demographic is that we want to engage, and how we want to engage them, and what's the feasibility in terms of resources. So yeah, a unique mix depends upon the institution's audience, and this will help to broaden the institutional impact. Okay, so going back to David McCullough and his book, History Matters, I found a really good website about why archaeology matters, and I sum it up and it's summed up here in 2 sentences. Why does archaeology, or we might say why does paleontology matter? Why does science matter? But okay, why does archaeology matter? It's because archaeology provides the physical remains of the past that tell our shared story, And understanding what came before us creates a sense of a place and identity that can enrich our lives. So that's my talk for this evening, and thank you for your attention.